Hello, everybody. Josh Brown here, back for another great episode on Franchise Euphoria. Well, today's episode is brought to you by IndieFranchiseLaw.com, a leading resource in the franchise space to help you if you're considering buying a franchise, turning your business into a franchise, or growing your business through a licensing or franchise structure. So go on, check it out, IndieFranchiseLaw.com. I think you'll find a lot of valuable and free information as you continue to kind of weigh franchising and licensing and the growth of your business. Without further ado, I hope you enjoy today's episode. So on today's episode of Franchise Euphoria, we really have a first. I've done over 300 episodes. And on this episode, I've got Ryan Junk, who is the president of CycleBar, which is the first and the largest indoor cycling boutique franchise. From his days as a personal trainer, salesperson, and general manager at Fitness USA to leadership roles at 24 Hour Fitness, LA Boxing, UFC Gyms, and now Xponential Fitness, Ryan is an expert in the fitness and franchising industries. And like I said, he's now the president of CycleBar. But what's interesting and different about this interview is I happen to know a fair amount about CycleBar. In full candor, I've worked with some of their early franchisees, and they experienced some problems with their system. And today I have a very candid conversation with Ryan about those problems and about those issues that the early franchisees in particular experience. And we talk about that. We talk about ways in which they dealt with that. And we also talk about ways that the company and the brand has evolved over time. So this is truly a unique interview and a first for me because, I really do challenge Ryan and challenge the CycleBar model as we get into this discussion. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy this interview with Ryan Junk. Hello, Ryan. Welcome to Franchise Euphoria. How you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thrilled to have you on. You're obviously the president of CycleBar, so we'll certainly be spending a lot of time talking about that franchise. But as I often do on my show, I like to have the audience hear a little bit about your background and your experience and what sort of led you to your current position. So if you wouldn't mind, take a couple minutes and talk about your previous experience that led you to CycleBar.
Yeah, I'd love to. Mainly fitness. I've been in the fitness industry now for almost 23 years. So it's an industry that I love. I've been pretty athletic my whole life and been around it. And I love to tell the story of how I got into it. I had a friend that told me that if I wanted a summer job at a gym, I had to lie to the general manager to tell him I was looking for a career to be able to get hired. And the lie was on me because here I am 23 years later and I'm still in that industry. And I've seen it from different angles. I started off as a personal trainer and moved up into management, worked in big box gyms for years. A lot of my experience was through big box gyms, mainly at 24 Hour Fitness. Worked in several different markets in California, Hawaii, and then moved up and helped start a company called UFC Gym, which the founder of 24 Hour Fitness branched off and decided to kind of shake up the fitness industry a little bit and trying to make more of a boutique type of class offering, but in a big 40,000 square foot box feel. We started to grow that company, had some great successes, and then ended up getting into franchising. And the way we got into franchising was acquiring a fitness franchise at the time called LA Boxing. It's how I met Anthony Geisler, who's the CEO of Xponential Fitness, and grew that. And then I realized that I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I also found out that there was a lot of fitness franchisees that weren't really getting the support and the guidance that they needed to be successful. So my wife and I branched off and started our own consulting company and started consulting for a lot of boutique fitness and different modalities from yoga to HIIT training to boxing, and even some high-end celebrity studios. And then got an offer to go back into UFC Gym. Mark Mastro, the founder of that, actually went back in full-time management. I went back, started to run that company as the president. And then I got a call from Anthony Geisler to team back up with him and run CycleBar as the president of that brand. And so that's kind of brought me here today.
So I'm curious, before we dive into CycleBar, so tell me about the consulting part of that. So you go out, you and your wife, and you launch this business. I mean, were you consulting on trainings and programs, or how to actually run the business? I mean, in other words, were you focused more on the fitness side or the running of a fitness business?
Well, because our target was franchisees, we didn't really have to worry about the fitness side of it. It was more of the sales, marketing, the business side of it, and then some we just helped with consulting and just gave advice and helped with strategy, and others we actually helped manage to the point where I went in and helped hire management, held management accountable, train staff, and helped build their dues base.
And so from that, then you got sucked back into the corporate environment, right? So you get sucked back into to CycleBar. Take a minute, because for the folks who aren't familiar with CycleBar, maybe you can give a little bit of the history of when it started, how it started, and how it sort of built up.
Yeah, CycleBar is a phenomenal brand that started franchising in 2015. Really, though, in 2013, they had the first two kind of proof of concepts, and the founding group that started the company worked out with another, legacy franchisee, or I would say founder, Bill Pryor, out in Boston, and really went to market in franchising in 2015, and then in 2015 till about to the exact day, October 31st, 2017 they operated, ran, and sold franchises in that time before Xponential took over. And like CycleBar, really, it's a phenomenal concept. It's the high intensity, low impact training through indoor premium cycling. It was really inspired from the great work that Soul Cycle did and Flywheel. But no one was really franchising at that time. So the founding group decided that it was the perfect market to really get into franchising and taking that model and taking kind of the best of both of those brands and then adding a little spin to it in class offerings, because we do offer three different types of classes. One that kind of relates to what you would get at a Soul Cycle, another one kind of like what you would see at Fly, and then our own type of performance brand. So you have three different types of classes versus the one. And then decided to go to market on franchising. So since 2015 to 2017, before we acquired the company, CycleBar sold 280 locations.
So for those who, let's break this down a little bit more, because obviously this is an audio podcast. So I always like to give the guests an opportunity to kind of set the scene for what
Mhm.
the franchise looks like. So walk us through, somebody walks into a cycle bar, what are they going to experience from when they walk in the door to what are the training sessions like? What are the trainers like? What is the look and feel of it for those who aren't as familiar?
Yeah, the look and feel. It's for all genders, all ages. And the reason I say that is if you go into some particular boutique studios, you can tell what gender they're catering to. Ours is a very nice, bright red, black, and white colors. Very, very premium looking. When you walk in, there's a nice red and white front desk, merchandise on the walls. You've got nice tiles, and then you have like a cubby where your shoes are waiting for you. You actually have free rental shoes that you're able to use, or you bring your own. There's a bunch of Apple iPads out where you go in when you check in for your ride. You get to actually book your bike on an app, and so you pick your specific spot in class that you want to sit. It shows where the fans are, where the instructor is, so you kind of know exactly where you want to be. And then you check in, you get your shoes, and then you go in and you fill up your water with Flow Water Station. It's purified water. You have a towel waiting for you. When the ride's done, you have your nice, cool eucalyptus towel. And then while you're there, if you're a guest, it's your first time. Maybe it's a little bit different experience because you're shown around, and there's an actual process now to touring around first time riders, because sometimes you don't believe it, but it's a little intimidating when you take a cycling class for the first time. And then you go into the theater, and in this theater, you've got 50 bikes, 49 that are available for members to use. One is the instructor. The instructor's on a podium. It's black flooring. You've got these cool black bikes with gray and white lettering. The bikes glow red. The instructor can control the lighting in the room. And then there's huge big monitors that show your stats for the output that you're putting in during these rides, depending on the class that you take. One class doesn't have any stats at all, and the other two do. And then, the experience is very communal. Everybody kind of knows each other. It's a great feeling after class. We do different types of theme rides where it's to different types of music and different types of DJs. There's a lot of fundraising that we do in the communities that we're in. And then you leave and hopefully you're coming back 2 to 3 times a week. When you're done with the class, you get an email too that gives you your results from your class. So it gives you your breakdown, tells you where you ranked in the class, and it gives you your stats.
And is this a subscription type model or a monthly model where people pay a monthly fee, they come in, they get, as many workouts as they want, or are they paying by class, or how does that work?
All the above. Before we acquired the company, it was more pay by class. What we do at our model is it's about 70 to 80% of it is recurring through EFT. So you have a subscription, and then there are drop-in rates. There are also packages for those that don't want to do the subscription. But we're, as a company average, we're at 70% right now, our recurring subscription.
Well, so, and you had mentioned a few minutes ago, you had mentioned about the growth of CycleBar, because I've been in franchising for 14 years as a lawyer, and then also had some previous business experience with it. And, the concept was started in 2013. It was franchised 2 years later. Uh, From the time that it was started to when it was franchised, how many locations were there before it was franchised?
Uh, Two.
Okay, so those had obviously operated for a couple years. You get into franchising 2015 to 2017, and over that 2-year period, you sell, not you because you weren't there then, but the folks there sell 280 franchise locations. Is that right?
Yeah, it's phenomenal. 283 to be exact, but yes.
That's that's off the charts. I mean, how does that happen? First of all, I mean, it's not that easy to sell. So first, I want to find out how does that happen? How do you sell that many? And then I want to ask a follow up question on that.
So I'll tell you the easiest was they really kind of piggybacked on Club Pilates. So the company that sells franchises for Club Pilates is STG, and they did a phenomenal job selling franchises there. And that concept took off. They're literally at 900 sold right now, and I think almost 600 open. So with the success of Club Pilates, and they sold, with the exception of the first 28 before Anthony Geyser purchased the company, um, every unit was sold by STG. So what they decided to do was really get behind and create this cycle bar concept. And there's a lot of energy and hype around indoor cycling. And at the time, no one was franchising it. And so you see the success of Club Pilates, and then you see this new concept that's sexy and it's hot, and 50 bikes, one instructor. So you look at the labor that you're leveraging there, and you see the success of the two founding locations. A lot of people jumped on it.
Well, and talk a little bit, because obviously to the outside world and to the franchisor, growing at that fast of a clip is phenomenal and certainly unusual and unique, right? I mean, concepts just don't typically grow that fast. But I also think that there's another side to it. I mean, I often talk about the fact that, as much as franchisors want to grow really fast, you got to look at it as well from the franchisee perspective. And you got to make sure that your growth is in line with your operational structure, so that you can support those franchisees and give them the best opportunity for success. If you could, can you talk a little bit about, to the extent obviously, because this would be learned at this point through secondhand knowledge from STG, but if you can talk about those early days where they're just growing leaps and bounds in a 2-year period, 280 sold, 100 open, that is incredibly fast. How were they able to support that?
So, and they couldn't. So what you said, you summed it up perfectly. The being a franchisor and being a successful franchisor, the easiest part, in my opinion, in this business is selling someone a franchise. The hardest part is getting it open and getting them to run the play that you've created as a founder. So you have this playbook that you've created, and it's not as easy as just handing it to somebody and expecting them to run it. It's never that easy. And so when you look at the success of Club Pilates, that didn't just happen overnight. And that didn't just happen at Club Pilates either. You got Anthony Geisler, who started in this industry back in the early 2000s at LA Boxing and made a ton of mistakes at that time. And it took him about 12 years to sell 150 locations. And it took him that long to get 100 locations open. And so he went through a lot of trial and error. That's over 10 years of experience of figuring this model out and figuring out franchising and figuring out what works and what doesn't work and figuring out relationships with franchisees and getting their influence or influencing them, following your strategies. So when he took that experience and really took LA Boxing to the level of selling to the UFC gym, he then left and then started Club Pilates, but it was more of just plugging in that play. He knew he knew he needed a national sales director. He knew he needed a president. He knew he needed someone in development. He knew he needed someone in real estate, in retail, and he broke down all the different pieces. And as you grow, you just add people underneath those departments. A lot of times, if you just grow, which would happen at CycleBar, is I'll give you one specific example is you sell 280 locations in a short period of time. You now have 100 open studios and nobody at the corporate office is in charge of studio sales. And this is a sales and marketing business, right? So it really comes down to you can sell those, but do you have the right support? And then also, are the franchisees that were sold those 283 locations, were they prepared for what they're getting into? Did they know, do they know what they're going to be doing? So there has to be alignment between you and your franchisee. So again, like you mentioned earlier, we didn't sell the 283. We didn't open the first 100, but we have, opened up over 100 since. But it really comes down to alignment between you and the franchisee and then being able to support them.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a couple interesting things that you said. I mean, first is, I've worked with tons of franchisors, companies, that become franchises as well as franchisees. And it's sort of fascinating because when you're the franchisor and you're out there and you're thinking about the prospect of growing the franchise, I find that even though these people have been successful with their business as a corporate structure, the biggest fear that they have is the selling. But then I also think you're exactly right that it turns out selling them is actually the easiest part. And I always tell them that the hardest part is supporting it on the back end. So it's sort of like be careful what you wish for, because if you have the success selling them, but you don't have the support, you're going to have a lot of pissed off franchisees. And I think with Cycle Bar, what happened was, at least I know in certain instances, especially with the first franchisees, is here you have this quote unquote hot concept. You've got good salespeople, and you've got franchisees who are buying in to a belief that the franchise system is actually solid at that point, has good structure, has good processes, has the branding. And, to a certain extent, at least in the early days for Cycle Bar, it doesn't seem like that was in place. And so it's a telltale sign and a lesson, I think, for everybody who would be listening and who would be on the franchisee side and on the franchisor side who looks to go into franchising. I mean, you got to be really careful when you're becoming part of a new concept, right? I mean, you kind of have to go in with your eyes wide open a little bit, but when you are a part of something like Cycle Bar in its early days and the growth is so fast, they're really growing it on the backs of the franchisees, which can be disastrous for the franchisees. I mean, would you agree with that?
I would, to a certain extent, because at the end of the day, there needs to be some personal accountability as well. I hear too often when I was consulting, when I would talk to franchisees, and now this is me as my consulting hat, not my president of CycleBar hat, but I would talk to franchisees that would put all the blame on the franchisor and would tell me all the things that they said that's not working. And when I would dig into it, I would find out half the time it was us just not doing it the right way. So I think a lot of times in that sales process, I think where the franchisor has to do a really good job is being crystal clear on what's expected from the franchisee and what work needs to go into it. And what I think happened, and I'll now switch to specifically speaking to CycleBar. What happened there is you had these corporate affiliated locations, and you had rock stars that were leading them. And so you don't maybe need as many processes because you have this natural skill set of attracting people and attracting talent and selling without trying to sell and all of a sudden now you start to franchise and your systems aren't as tight as you thought they were, and the support that you're offering, I'll give you an example with CycleBar. They had all the intentions of supporting their franchisees. They weren't just sitting back collecting checks. Their labor went through the roof because they threw labor at problems versus process, which I can talk to you later. But it really comes down to, is your system ready to scale? Is it ready to franchise? Can you support someone that does not know your industry? Or do you have to have technical skills? Is there a certain skill set as a franchisee that you have to have if you're going to run this? And I think both parties need to be upfront, understanding what that work looks like before you buy one. So even if you are kind of an early adopter to a new franchise business, you've got to really go in there and understand, is this something I'm passionate about? And since I'm one of the first, I have to go in there understanding that there's going to be some learnings that I'm going to have to share back with the franchisee, because they don't have a lot of franchises to take. They have their corporate stores, and that's a lot different than someone that they've never groomed or trained from birth on how to run their business, and they're not in the day-to-day weeds of that business. And if you're the person that is willing to communicate and want to be one of the first early adopters, uses a lot of benefits from that. But if you're someone that is looking at, hey, look, I want a play that's going to work and it's proven out, and I don't want to do much work into the business, I want to hire someone to run it, then to your point, it's probably not a good idea.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair, and I think you're right. I mean, I think it does certainly, somebody who's coming into an early system. I know I've worked with several of them, and they have to acknowledge that there's risk associated there, right? I mean, you're an early adopter at that point. But then on the flip side, I think that there's also there's also responsibility on the franchisor side to know the type of person who's gonna be likely a good franchisee, right? Have sort of a persona about that. And then also to have the actual model, somewhat down, i.e., let's say the size of the footprint, the layout of the store, all that kind of stuff. Because I think tweaking that as you go on the backs of a franchisee who is not a who may not be like you were talking about in the corporate store, these natural salespeople, then I think there's likely burden and blame on both sides, because they should have never been awarded that franchise, because they're still putting up their money, their earnings, their lifetime savings into that system. And I'm not trying to beat up on CycleBar too hard. I'm trying to use it as an example that this happens quite a bit. Now, not to the extent of 280 locations in a 2-year period, but when you're talking about a franchise system that isn't probably ready to franchise at that point in time, but does, then it's a lesson, I think, to everybody that if you go into that with your eyes wide open as a franchisee, then sort of buyer beware, right? I mean, you got you got to understand that there's risks there, but at the same point, I think sometimes franchisors are just too early into the franchise game. Maybe it would have been more prudent for CycleBar to take another 2 years, develop more stores, develop more corporate stores, get somebody in there who's running a store who maybe isn't, a rock store, test out this market a little bit. Um, and that might be the solution, but that combats against the idea of growing and growing fast, especially when it's part of a group that's already grown another fitness concept, right? So I get all that. I think the lesson in all of it is that obviously they have it. It sounds like CycleBar has worked through some of those challenges. And I'd like to talk about that next phase, sort of as you had mentioned the labor versus the process, sort of how CycleBar, through the growth of the franchise, sort of has fixed or made changes to its operational structure and processes to now, make it a better franchise opportunity.
Yeah, no, and you are spot on. When you look at people that are franchising, it's purely growth, right? You don't have to put up the capital expense, and you can grow a lot quicker. I think for if you're a prospect looking at buying a franchise, you're buying the service, you're buying the support, and I think that, to me, that was the biggest miss at CycleBar. If you want to use it as a case study, the biggest issue that we saw was that, I would say about 75%, almost 75 locations of the 100 locations that were open were breaking even or losing money. That's a huge amount. And so for us, a lot
At
of the
what point
questions
was that? Like, what year was that when that was
that
happening?
was in October 2017. So when we took it over, we knew the areas that we know we can make an immediate impact on. So when we looked into that, we saw a great brand because the branding experts were from Procter and Gamble, and they did a great job putting that together. The class offerings were phenomenal. Instructors were great. It was the operations. So when we bought the company in October, we bought the company October 2017. I came on in November and immediately stopped selling franchises. So we stopped selling. We even had people that weren't very happy, but they came to Discovery Day and they're ready to sign, and we stopped. We wouldn't sell any franchises for 3 months. We didn't put a date. That was the worst part. We said we didn't know how long. It was until we figured out how we were going to fix it. So we stopped selling franchises and we stopped approving leases. Unfortunately, we had a lot of leases signed. I think we had about 20 locations with signed leases at the time that needed to get open because you're on the clock. So we went right to solving two problems. Number one was the build out because it was too expensive, and number two was the ops. So number one, with the build out, they're about 3,500 square feet, way too big for a boutique studio. So we did is protect the bite counts because we didn't want to lose revenue. And then we dug right into how do we bring down the cost, because on the FDD, it was 250,000, 900,000. And if you want to give pointers, if someone gives me an FDD and it has that big of a swing and there's
That's
one model,
huge.
I would probably walk the other way. So there was nothing illegal. There was nothing misleading. Everything in the FDD was there, but it was such a big swing. And I think a lot of the questions that weren't answered were, well, how much is it going to cost me in my market? And I think a lot of people said, for example, you used Indiana. Well, I'm in Indiana. I'm not in California. I'm not in Manhattan. So I'm probably around 400,000 to 500,000. So then you take out an SBA loan for that amount, and now you're into your build out. And what we found out was about average was 750,000. So now you're getting high interest loans, you're increasing your operating capital. And then at the time, and I can get ops later, is that, they needed all these extras that were in there. And you had all these extra showers that people don't use in most of the markets that we're in. So we literally went in, we shrunk the footprint to 2,000 to 2,200 square feet. So automatically you're saving on leasehold improvement. Automatically you're saving on HVAC. We protected the bike count, took out things in there, and I can go on for another hour, but took out pieces of the build out that weren't necessary. And then we found better pricing. So for an example, the tile was from Portugal and it was about $23 a square foot. We found tile that looks exactly the same here for $3 a square foot. You take out the mandated showers, and we changed the curved back. There's just a lot of extra things that were put into place. There was a marketing wall that divided the room that took up square footage for that you're paying rent on, and it cost about 10 grand to put up this wall for marketing. So we shrunk it. Now we're all in. We're at 500K. So now our swing on the FTD is about 350 to 490, and that's all in. So
You guys you redesigned the entire physical layout of the offering.
I wouldn't even say redesign, but yeah, we did. We shrunk it because it still looks the same. I mean, it
Okay, so
still has.
but it doesn't
Yeah,
have the number of showers, it doesn't have
nope.
the but and that's huge, right? On a lease, obviously, if you're going down
Yes.
from it was over 3,000 square feet down to 2,000 square feet on a build out, that's a huge difference. Uh, so what happened then? Because I applaud you for doing that, but what about all those people who bought in under the old concept? I mean, if there were 100 that were open during that time, you guys stopped then selling franchises. What happened to those people who were in and likely tied into a lease, a long-term lease, in a space that's now too big, that is likely one of the reasons that they're not, like you said, breaking even or losing money. Um, and so what happened with those folks? Like how did you guys deal with that?
So that was the second part, was operations. So obviously it's very uncomfortable to have to tell your franchisees that you're spending too much money on rent, you're too big, and there's nothing you can do about it. So your options are to try to sell it to somebody else and have somebody else take over your business, or you have to kind of switch the way that you're operating now. And the way that we did that was I immediately hired a couple of salespeople that I've worked with in the past. Didn't even know what their titles would be at the time, but just literally hired them and told them to go travel the country and teach people how to sell. We didn't even stop to talk about how we're going to sell CycleBar. We literally went into just sales one-on-one.
You mean to help sell these locations for these
No,
franchisees?
no, no, to sell memberships, literally to help these
Oh,
people
to help them grow their memberships,
to
okay.
drive revenue, correct, to drive revenue. The prior company, about 2 months before we bought the company, just started selling reoccurring memberships. So they literally just started getting into it. I think the average was about 60 members per location is what the cycle bars had at the time. To put that into perspective, 2 years later, now we're averaging 280 members per store. But if you look at that, what we did was we had to isolate what was the issue. How they monetized it was trying to monetize it kind of like a soul cycle, where it's just pay by workout, and that doesn't work in most markets in the U.S. And that's why you don't see soul cycle in Middle America and all over the U.S. because there's certain markets that really works in. So what we did was we had to switch everybody to reoccurring revenue. And you kind of go in order, right? So we looked at the corporate office that we had in Cincinnati. Nobody there was going to really help drive the value that we needed. And it was heavy, heavy labor, like I mentioned earlier, but there was no real process. So we kept one employee from Cincinnati, and that was Tevye Selly, who's the head of our education, who really kind of created the rides. And then we hired everybody from scratch. And I kind of, like I mentioned earlier, following the same formula that Anthony has that he's done at Club Pilates, and we started kind of hiring those department heads. But what we did was we had to switch everybody to reoccurring revenue. The reason you do that is that you have better attrition and it's easier to sell, and it's just you're more predictable as a franchisee. Because what happened before in version one, there was no selling in pre-sale. What pre-sale means is when your studio is being built, so no one would sell anything. And then what would happen would be you would then offer these 24 days of free rides, and the goal was that you would open your studio and these 24 people would come and love, I'm sorry, for 24 days, 3,000 people would come and try out your studio experience. They would love it so much that they would go home online and they would purchase a membership or a package, I should say. A couple of things wrong with that. There were no phones in the studios, so you couldn't even call. You had to go to the website because the company at the time,
Oh my
people
god.
didn't use phones. So there were no phones, and every location had their own URL. So when you have 4 or 5 locations, I guess you can get away with that. But when you have 100 locations, there's no digital play. And you couldn't do anything nationally because you basically have 100 locations that are now small mom and pop websites that are competing with each other. Even if you tried to do something national, you're driving up your costs because they're all competing with each other. So we looked at that. We redid the website. We redid the app.
Well, because and also, and not to interrupt you, but like the grand openings and how you start off is a huge indicator of future success. And I would argue one of the reasons that Orange Theory has been so successful. I think they do probably the best job I've ever seen of grand openings and getting people in as members. So that when you start off, as you said, on the reoccurring kind of model, you start off right out of the gates.
And that's how it should work. Well, CycleBar, and this is where it kind of contradicts what you just said, came out of the gates doubling what Orange Theory was doing because everybody was buying packages. There was no pre-sale. So Orange Theory does a 2, 3, 4 month pre-sale where you're selling memberships. But when you open, you then wait 30 days before you then tap them for their monthly dues. And then you see a huge ramp. So every month that they go on, their revenue steadily increases. Whereas CycleBar had a huge spike month one, and then they would take a huge dive month two, month three, sometimes even month four.
Yeah.
Everybody would buy these big packages. Well, now you have a franchisee that has to pay rent and they have to pay labor. And now these people aren't re-upping quick enough and there's no sales process in place. So the best way to manipulate the market is to give discounts. Well, then now you get people to buy sooner, but now you're ruining your margin. So that kind of snowballed. So what we do now is we do a pre-sale for, like I just mentioned, for 2 to 3 months. And your goal is to be at break even when you open. And that's net of 300 members. And we're averaging 340 right now for our new studios. So now you've got over 300 members, you're covering your expenses, but now each month you're growing your revenue, huge ramp up for your first year. So I would say a bigger difference. But going back, that wasn't even my focus because I knew that the new studios would be fine. I mean, if you look at right now, with implementing the sales process, the website, the app. Now, mind you, we had to change a whole CRM system, a whole website, and an app, and we did it in 4 months.
Wow.
So that obviously upset a lot of people. I mean, we had to educate our franchisees on how to book, how to buy, how to sell, how to present on a new system. We had to educate the consumer how to do it and the members. So, and as you know, there's always, it doesn't ever go off perfect. So there were a ton of issues in that time. But the one thing that I am proud about that we did do with this switch is that we really focus and narrowed in on same store sales. Because to your point earlier, what about these 75 locations? Like what happens to them? I can't change their expenses, but what I can do is drive revenue.
So
So
what happened
we're
with those with those places now flat going forward a little bit? And obviously it sounds like you guys put in a much better operational platform and systems. Um, what happened to those locations? I mean, is this a story where, a lot of them are still around, or did they change hands, or what happened with those folks who are stuck in a model where yes, certainly they can change their CRM, they can change their app, they can change uh, their structure in terms of how they collect fees and answer calls and all that stuff, but they can't change their lease, um, and the size of their footprint. So what happened to most of those folks?
So right now, we measure this pretty often. So right now, when we bought the company, like I mentioned, 75% of them are break even or losing. Now we're down to about, I think 65% of them are actually making money or above break even. So 35% are break even and losing right now. So we've almost flipped it. I mean, we're on our 24th consecutive month of same store sales growth. So that's anybody that's been open for more than 12 months. And that's, I would say, averaging 17% per month. And that's literally by just driving in sales and converting them to reoccurring memberships. So you've got that piece of it. And how we did that was getting general managers in the studios that didn't exist before, having a sales focus, having a sales presentation. Attrition has gone down tremendously. When we bought the company, even though the class offering was great, there wasn't a lot of communication and help with onboarding and continued education with instructors. So we implemented that, and we went from 17% attrition down to 7% now. So you fix attrition, you drive revenue, and again, these aren't corporate stores. So these are all, we don't have a single corporate store. So all these results are done by the franchisees. A lot of it were the same franchisees that started it, that didn't necessarily buy into this process, but now they're committed. Like you said, they're on a lease.
So let me ask you this: for those that are surviving and that will make it through, let's say they get to the end of their lease, they're gonna have to probably get a new location, right?
Well, it's up to them. At that point, it depends on your revenue, right? So
Yeah, I guess.
if
Yeah, yeah.
revenue where they're making money, they may not want to take the risk of relocating it because there's always some collateral damage there, right? Or they renegotiate with the landlord, or they do relo, and we're open to that as well. We're supportive on that piece of it.
No, I mean,
But
I
going
think
back,
this is a great conversation on it because I think it walks through for the people listening, and you know, uh, this is sort of what happens in a franchise system that grows too fast. And you guys, it sounds like, have done a really good job, obviously coming in with Exponential and fixing a lot of that. It sounds like Exponential saw an opportunity here with good branding, good classes, and they knew they could come in and well, they hoped they could come in, get a good buy on all this, because things weren't going well, and then hopefully turn it around, create greater value. Flashing forward a little bit of where you guys are now to where you want to go. I mean, who are the ideal franchisees that you're looking for now as you move forward with this brand?
I would say people that are passionate about fitness, number one, there has to be a passion there because the level of engagement varies based on the operator and how much time they really want to spend in the studio. But what we do want to make sure is that there is that passion for the brand where they want to be connected, whether it's remotely. I mean, I have franchisees that manage locations in different states, and I have some that are there every day. But the one thing that we've seen, and with, like you mentioned, the growth of franchises. If you look at Club Pilates, um, they grew faster than CycleBar, and they sold more locations and doubled the locations in opening in the first 2 years than CycleBar did. But the biggest difference is the support. They had GMs in there from day one. They pre-sold memberships from day one. That's what I was kind of referencing earlier to Anthony, already making those mistakes and learning this franchise business and fitness in the early 2000s. So it's not necessarily moving too fast. It's, do you have the right support system in studio, right, for the franchisee and the hiring model, and then on top of that at the corporate office. When you look at the support of having a general manager, are you willing to have a general manager, or are you being the franchisee wanting to do the general manager's job. If that's the case, we'd actually prefer you pass. You don't we don't want franchisees that are just wanting to buy a job. We want them to buy a business. And then there's a couple of different types of entrepreneurs, and there are some that really are disciplined around execution, and they love to collaborate and get ideas from people that have been successful and then take those ideas and execute them. There's others that actually want to be creative and want everything to kind of be their own, and they're both great. What we found is the one that wants to kind of create their own systems in their own way, they do not do well in franchising, or at least with our model. So make sure that the franchisee that's coming on understands that, and wants to be involved and wants to be engaged, but understands that there needs to be a general manager that's focused on driving sales. And there's different leads, there's different positions that their responsibility is to inspire and lead them. And that's the last one, is more leadership. We want to make sure that we got good citizens, right? We want to make sure that we've got people that are aligned with our core values. And one of the nice things about Discovery Day, the first day we go on a ride, and we then go to dinner, and we have a couple cocktails, and people are in their comfortable environment, casual environment. You can really see the people that do care. And then you see the ones that don't. And if you don't care about fitness, it translates to your employees, and it translates to the customer. And those franchisees usually don't make it. And then we can also tell those who are wanting to kind of fall in line with systems. I mean, we've had people that I've disqualified that won't even get on the bus. So what I mean by that is they don't want to take the Sprinter where everybody's in a Sprinter to go to the studio to take the ride. They want to take their rental car that's already parked behind it. And if you can't even get on the bus, like, you can't be a franchisee. So, we look at those different pieces as well.
So Exponential has a lot of different brands, right? So you've got CycleBar, you got Club Pilates, you got Stretch Lab, who I recently interviewed the president there, Lou,
Lou?
right? I believe
Yeah.
it's Lou.
Yep.
And what other brands are part of Exponential Fitness? Number one, and then number two is sort of a final couple questions. Do you worry about the fitness market becoming oversaturated with options?
So the different brands that we have, we tried to cover all the different modalities in fitness. So we started off with Club Pilates, then we moved over to CycleBar, and then Stretch Lab, Row House, AKT, which is AKT is more like a dance concept. Then we have a yoga concept, which is Yoga Six, and then we have Stride, and then we have Pure Bar. So we have the 8 different modalities. We thought about a hit concept, which was kind of in play, but unless we were going to purchase Orange Theory, it didn't make sense, because there's just so many different type of hit concepts out there, and you're going to be end up taking over B locations in real estate. So we didn't want to get into that space. And then boxing didn't make sense, because Anthony really started that space with LA Boxing. So those two we kind of stayed away from. But the other part of your question is, it's not. I mean, I've been hearing this for years. Like I told you, I've been in the industry for a long time, and I remember back when you used to actually charge at big box gyms. You charge extra for people that wanted to use the cardio equipment, the new cardio equipment that just came in that was motorized. And people would say all the time, no one's gonna continue to pay this much for a gym membership when they can do it outside. And it hasn't. And what boutique has done, in my opinion, is really changed the landscape in fitness. It's made it now a lot more fun, a lot more communal. And it's gotten people to enjoy exercising. People look forward to it now. They want to go to their fitness studios. So what we've done is kind of taken that, and they really help drive the same customers to the same market. So even if we're in the same shopping center, what we're seeing now is franchisees, like I'll give you an example, a Club Pilates is sold out in their market. They can't buy anymore. But there's a cycle bar that wants to either resell, because it's one of these franchisees that were in the early stages, and they don't want to hire a manager, and they don't want to spend the marketing dollars, and they don't want to run the new version, right? So they can sell to that franchisee, and now that Club Pilates owner has a cycle bar, and a Club Pilates. We have other brands like a Row House that opens up, and now they have a great relationship with their landlord, and now they want to open up a cycle bar in the same shopping center. They can do that, and it doesn't cannibalize each other. We've been seeing that. It's almost like you look at a car dealership. Now they're all stacked up, kind of like they call it the auto row, where everybody kind of lines up, because you're driving all the consumers to that, and it helps everybody. And we've been seeing that in fitness a lot.
Well, if you want to learn more about CycleBar, you can go to cyclebar.com or cyclebar.com/franchise. Thank you, Ryan, for coming on. For you've been this is great. Thank you for explaining everything, and taking a little bit of heat, not you personally, but but dealing with the brand. And I really appreciate it.
No, I appreciate you, and you know what? Thank you for actually having these conversations, because I think the biggest part with CycleBar is distinguishing between version one and version two, and we own it. So we own, even though we didn't own it and sell the first 283, they're ours. So I appreciate you asking the questions.
Thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of Franchise Euphoria. If you enjoyed this episode or have enjoyed the podcast in general, I would really appreciate it if you could go to iTunes and leave me a rating and review. It really helps to get this podcast out to more and more people. So the easy way to do it is go to iTunes and in the search box, put in Franchise Euphoria. You will then see my cover art, and you click on my smiling face that says Franchise Euphoria, and then click on the link that says ratings and reviews. It's that simple, but boy, oh boy, does it mean the world to me when people leave ratings and reviews. And like I said, it really helps get the show out there. Once again, would love it if you would go to iTunes and leave a rating and review if you enjoyed this episode or other episodes of the show. And until the next time, happy franchising.